Hello, my friends. My name is Mariana Lewis. I am an archetypal tarotist and a scholar of depth psychology. And today I want to talk about something that is kind of personal, but deeply moving and deeply meaningful. And we're going to talk all about Mary Magdalene. I've been to a lot of holy places in my life. I've been to the cathedrals of France, the basilicas of Rome. I've been to the redwoods in California. I've been to the sacred stones of Wales and England. I've gone a lot of places, and one of the holiest places I've ever been, I actually went this past summer. I walked in the footsteps of Mary Magdalene. And honestly, all my life, I've really never even given Mary Magdalene a second of thought. I was raised a good Catholic kid, so I did know about her, but I knew her as the penitent prostitute, right? The woman that Jesus forgives and who washes his feet with her tears, and that's really all I knew about her, and I didn't really care about her any more than that. And as I grew up and I moved into a more authentic experience of my spirituality, incorporating the feminine into it, Mary Magdalene still didn't come up on my radar at all. She was never someone I really imagined had anything for me. And then, as it usually goes, I found a book. That book was Megan Watterson's Mary Magdalene Revealed. And it was really surprising. It told the story of a Mary Magdalene who was not at all the penitent prostitute, but actually a woman of spiritual authority in her own right. And in this book, Megan Watterson kept referencing a text called the Gospel of Mary. And I am honestly minorly obsessed with the Apocrypha. I'm just like, how are you not obsessed with something called the Apocrypha? And I should say, if you don't know what the Apocrypha is, it's essentially a collection of texts that are the books that didn't make it into the Bible, the ones that were rejected from the canon of the New Testament. And so I immediately went out in search of this Gospel of Mary. What is this book attributed to Mary Magdalene? And I found out, of course, that I actually already had it on my shelf and promptly devoured it. And it's really short. And actually, the story of this gospel is just like something that would come right out of like a Dan Brown novel. It's very mysterious and spooky. Essentially, at the end of the 19th century, someone found this scroll at a flea market, I think, in Cairo. And they brought it back to Germany to be translated. And they worked on it for a long time. And then right before it was completed, this water pipe burst and ruined it. And then World War I happened. And then the publisher died. And basically, it just took decades for this thing to actually get published. But it was. And it was really fascinating. And the one thing that's extremely fascinating about this text is that it's missing pages. And they've subsequently found 2 more copies of this Gospel of Mary, and both of them are missing the same pages. So someone did not want us to know something. And at this point, you might be thinking, what about the story of her being the penitent prostitute? How does this make any sense? But that little piece of information, this idea that Mary Magdalene was a penitent prostitute, is actually one of the greatest lies of history. This idea actually came from Pope Gregory I in 591. He gave this homily at Easter and basically said, look, there's a Mary here and there's a Mary there. They must be the same Mary. But biblical scholars have studied this a lot, and they are quite sure these are not the same Marys, and this was just something Pope Gregory made up. In fact, in 1969, Pope Paul IV corrected this mistake and basically said Mary Magdalene was never this penitent prostitute. She is someone entirely different. And I'm not going to get all into what the Gospel of Mary says. I highly recommend that you go and read it yourself. It basically reveals these secrets of Jesus' teaching, that the heaven that we're reaching for is actually already in the space of the soul. But I've read a decent amount of the Gnostic Gospels, and so some of what's in this book was not that revolutionary to me. What was more interesting was the power that Mary had. In the Gospel of Mary, Mary Magdalene is not showing up as some random disciple, some sinful woman who was permitted to hang out with the apostles. She is there as the figure of ultimate authority in the room. In the Gospel, Mary is telling the apostles these secrets that she's learned from Jesus because she was the one whom Jesus trusted the most. She claims that Jesus came to her through visions after the resurrection and told her these further secrets that were key to their preaching, to the apostles going out and teaching the world about Jesus' teachings. She tells them that Jesus came to her after the resurrection and gave her these visions of the deeper teachings that the apostles were meant to spread. And there's actually a little argument between the apostles. Some of them say, "Who are you to give us this wisdom? You're only a woman." And others say, "But we know that she was the one that Jesus loved the most." Essentially, part of the gospel is Mary trying to prove her authority, is trying to have the apostles believe that she has the right to spread this message. At the end of the gospel, the apostles go out to do their teaching, but we actually have more of Mary Magdalene's story from a Provençal tradition. So this is where my journey comes into it. This summer, I had the extraordinary opportunity of being able to walk the footsteps of Mary Magdalene, to go to Provence and find all of these places where she preached and lived and spread this wisdom that is so remarkable. The story goes that the Romans hunted down Mary Magdalene and put her on a rudderless boat, sending her out into the Mediterranean to die. Miraculously, she crosses the Mediterranean and lands on the southern coast of France. There she travels from the beach of Saint-Marie-de-la-Mer all the way to the peak of Mount St. Baume. And she is very much venerated in Provence. She is their central saint. It almost seems as if she is a figure that is equal to Christ in many ways. But we're not here to correct facts. We're not here to get all bogged down in the history, because I don't actually even want to talk about history. I don't have any intentions of trying to revise the Bible. As Joseph Campbell often reminded, we get very stuck in the literal and we forget the metaphorical. My interest in Mary Magdalene has very little to do with who she was as a real person and everything to do with the archetype that she represents. In the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and the Gospel of the Beloved Companion, which is a far more controversial book, but very interesting, Mary Magdalene is presented as the koinonos, which is a Greek word for companion. And this companion could have a lot of connotations. It could be a romantic companion, but it could also be a companion in spirituality and faith. But what it suggests is that Mary Magdalene was utterly beside Christ, maybe in his teaching, in his spiritual searching, in his wisdom. And in the Gospel of Mary, she presents herself as this authority of that spiritual wisdom, but she's denied it. And this is what's really important. There are some theories out there that one of the reasons this text has been really suppressed is because it would have given women authority in the church. It would have suggested that they too should be able to hold the priesthood. And of course, it all comes back to patriarchy. Cue the exit of many people right now. What Mary Magdalene represents archetypally is the holy priestess. And when we think of what the priestess looks like, if we conjure that image, that archetype to minds, we usually see one of two things. We either see the temptress in the temple, the ancient priestess wearing a toga, or we see the Instagram influencer dressed in white and banging a drum on the beach. Both of these images conjure something that feels inorganic or foreign to us. We can't actually connect to that idea of the priestess and find it to be inspiring, moving. We don't really find the power in it. But before the patriarchal revolution that occurred approximately 3,000 years ago, that image of the empowered priestess was very prevalent. It was a real thing that was central to society. Several decades after the Gospel of Mary Magdalene was found, another collection of texts was found called the Nag Hammadi Library. And in this collection of texts is a poem called The Thunder Perfect Mind. And this is a wild poem. I highly recommend you read it. And it's basically an archetypology, which is essentially a first-person declarative statement of power, usually by a god or some kind of divine being. And the figure in this poem is declaring their agency, their control, their enormous power in the world, and their opposition, their inherent duality. And what's really interesting about this is that the speaker is very clearly feminine. Rather than identifying as the masculine father god, it identifies as the mother, the daughter, the crone. And though, of course, we don't know who wrote this, we can imagine it was probably someone in great devotion to this feminine image of God. We can imagine the priestess writing this. And even earlier, 2,000 years before this was written, we have the poetry of Enheduanna. Enheduanna was a Sumerian priestess, and actually her poetry is the first ever written down. And the poems she writes are in devotion to Inanna, the goddess of the heavens. She writes, "O my lady, beloved of heaven, I have told your fury truly. Now that her priestess has returned to her place, Inanna's heart is restored. The day is auspicious. The priestess is clothed in beautiful robes, in womanly beauty, as if in the light of the rising moon." What is so remarkable about this poem is that it is the priestess who speaks. She sings of her vocation to the goddess, of her devotion to her. There is something powerful and honest and moving about this. But these are voices of the long past. These are images of the priestess that feels completely left behind. And in this modern day, when so many of us are trying to rediscover our spirituality, are trying to move toward that innate experience of priestesshood, we have these ancient stories, these ancient poems, but where is the flesh and blood person to model ourselves after? This is why I am so moved by Mary Magdalene. When I first discovered her gospel, I was just looking for something cool, something new to discover. And after learning more and more about her story, seeing everything she survived, everything that she held to as she fought to be believed and to be respected, I have finally found that image of what the priestess really looks like. Mary Magdalene was a woman of tremendous love, tremendous strength, tremendous faith. She did not run when the other apostles were afraid and sat at the foot of Christ as he was crucified. And when they dismissed her because she was a woman and because they didn't want to believe her, she never gave up preaching what she knew was right. She gave her entire life to Jesus' teachings, and I would guess, her own. And for me personally, as I move into a phase of my life where I am taking ownership and authority in my spirituality and my teachings that I offer the world, I will hold Mary Magdalene so close to my heart. As Jungian Nancy Qualls-Corbett writes, Mary Magdalene, then, from a viewpoint not restricted by patriarchal attitudes, is a feminine figure to which women can relate without betraying their essential nature. Her image is capable of carrying all the dynamic and transforming aspects of the feminine, passion, spirituality, and joyfulness. For so long, we have held the image of the spiritual authority as the priest, as the hierophant. We have seen the image of the man who is in deep relationship with the divine. And I am passionate about reclaiming the feminine side of that image. I am passionate about restoring the power of the High Priestess. She sits in her throne holding the scroll of wisdom that she is in full possession of. She guards the curtain that hides the mysteries that only she has access to. And her robes flow to become the waters of the unconscious. Her foot rests on the moon that is so intimately bound to her own nature. This is not a sermon about why you should go fall in love with Mary Magdalene like I did. Not at all. It's only a suggestion of someone you might turn to if you are seeking that archetype of the priestess in your own life. We want our spirituality to be authentic, and we want to believe our authority in it. So I hope the story of Mary Magdalene has offered you a small pathway to discovering those things within yourself. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate if you gave it a like, and maybe check out some of my other videos. I actually have one on the Gnostic goddess Sophia, as well as one on the Black Madonna, so those might interest you too. As always, I'd love it if you subscribed, stuck around, hung out with me for a while. And you can always also follow me on Instagram, where I talk all about the tarot and archetypes and everything juicy in-depth psychology, and I'm sure you'll love it there. Thank you so much for allowing me to talk at you for a while, because I'm obviously very passionate about it, if you couldn't tell. And if you did enjoy this video, I hope you follow the path that Mary Magdalene may open for you. Good luck in your journeys, my friends, and have a beautiful, meaningful day.